Hello, hello everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you, wherever you are in the world. And thank you for joining this webinar. Welcome to this very special Schwarzman Scholars virtual panel. My name is Federico Menino, and I am a member of the Schwarzman Scholars Global Admissions team. And I'm very glad to be co-hosting this webinar today with my very, very dear colleague, Sheila Crowell. Sheila is academic officer and she's based in our New York office. We're both very honored to be joined today by four extraordinary alumni of our program. And I invite everybody to turn on their cameras and just wave a quick hello to the audience today. I see that some attendees are popping up on our screen this morning. Thank you guys so much. They all will have a chance to introduce themselves, but just to give you a quick roundup of who is on your screen right now, Pauline Castermans, she's from the Netherlands and she's a member of the inaugural class of Schwarzman Scholars. We have Junyan Cheng, member of the second cohort, who's tuning in from the UK, even though the background here is deceiving. We have Roy Siegel, who is from Israel and graduated in the class of 2019, and also in his cohort, and a representative of the third cohort is Enoch Wong, who's talking to us and tuning in from Beijing. So thank you all very, very much for joining us today. This is very exciting to be here. And before we kick off our presentation, I see that there's still people populating the attendees list. I would like to take a few seconds, just if you can use the raise hand button on your screen. To indicate that you can hear us well and you can see us well. Very good, thank you very much, everybody. And I will stop sharing my screen. We don't have a PowerPoint presentation. We have much more exciting things to showcase today. So basically, I just wanted to give you a quick introduction about what is the purpose of this session today and what we're here for. Today's session is part of a feature spotlight series of webinars and virtual engagement activities that the admissions team is promoting in this spring in collaboration with alumni and staff members of many other teams in Schwarzman Scholars. Through this new online outreach initiative that we launched this year, we hope to present our program from multiple angles and innovative perspectives. This is an opportunity for a broad audience of prospective candidates, students, faculty, and young leaders from all over the world to know a little bit more about the various aspects of our program and to get a better sense of the unique Schwarzman Scholars experience. So if you haven't done so yet, I invite you all to visit our webpage. Now we have a full schedule of webinars still planned for the season, and soon we'll be posting a few other feature spotlight series that will happen throughout the summer. So please visit our website. To talk a little bit about the goal of this particular webinar today, the idea here is to showcase a conversation around a very central component of the Schwarzman Scholars curriculum, namely the final Capstone project. So the Capstone project, as Sheila will explain in a few minutes, is a core part of the academic program and one of the main requirements to completing the master's degree in global affairs at Tsinghua University. So despite the importance and the centrality of the Capstone, this is a component of the curriculum that is still not that widely known to the wider public or to the external public. So over the years, several students, prospective applicants, faculty, and many other stakeholders, they often reach out to the admissions team, but definitely to people in the staff and to scholars willing to know more about what is the Capstone about, what it entails, how it compares to other forms of academic research and a PhD thesis or a master's thesis. So the idea of this Capstone is it's an initial attempt to start bridging this gap by bringing together a very diverse group of scholars. Of course, it would be impossible to create in a very short panel a perfect sample that represent the breadth and the variety and the incredible quality of all the capstones produced in the course of the first years of the program. But we have here, 4 scholars representing 3 cohorts, who come from very diverse backgrounds, who are representing different continents and country, but I think what they all have in common, and they all explored, as you will see soon, very, very different topics for their capstone projects. But I think what they have in common is that they all produced outstanding theses and outstanding final projects, and that's why they were recommended and suggested by many of our staff members who definitely said, well, invite those guys, they're amazing. So, and their theses is really, are really incredible. I will, before I pass the word to Sheila, I just wanted to give you a quick note about the agenda and the plan for the day today. I will pass the word to my very dear colleague, Sheila, who is part of the academics team, and she will talk very briefly about what is the Capstone project and how it fits within the larger scope of the academic program and the goals of the program. Then we'll open up for a round of short presentation in which each of the 4 scholars today will talk for 5 minutes or so about their thesis, their topic, and what they study, the interest. And then after that, we'll have a round of facilitated questions. So a few reminders before we move on. The chat box today is deactivated. So, I ask all of you attendees that if you have questions, please submit us through the Q&A box. And my suggestion is that you leave those questions to the second half or the end of the presentation when we'll have more time to address them. But please only use the question and answer box. And for other inquiries, the last reminder before passing the word to Sheila, this is of course a special webinar on the Capstone project and the overall academic experience at Schwarzman College. So if you have questions about our admissions process, or if you have questions that are not strictly related to the topic of today's presentation, I do invite you to send us an email, reach out through other means, and again, visit the website because we will have quite a few other webinars to talk about the specificities and requirements of the application process. Just as a final reminder, the application process is now open for US and global applicants, and it will remain open until the end of September. So without further ado, Sheila, the mic is yours. And thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thanks, Federico. So just to get into a little bit more detail about what the capstone entails, as Federico mentioned, it's really a central part of the Schwarzman Scholars experience. It's an opportunity to focus on a specific research question in more detail and apply one's learning from throughout the year to answer it or attempt to answer it. So forms of the capstone project include a research paper, a case study, or a policy analysis. And to complete one's capstone, you would work closely with a faculty advisor who provides guidance and feedback on your project as you're working through the research question. It concludes with a written report as well as an oral defense. And in terms of making sure that the capstone project is responsive to student feedback as well, for the first time this year, we offered a pilot group capstone in which students work on a specific question as linked to a partner organization. So examples of partner organizations that student teams are working on this year include VIP Kid, which focuses on online education, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as well as Perfect World, which is a video game organization. So in teams of 3 to 5 students, students are working on their group capstones now and participating alongside these partner organizations to work on tangible questions within the sort of business or other sectors. So with that, I will lend it over to our alumni who have graciously volunteered their time today.
Thank you, Sheila. So the way we're going to do this, and this is, you guys are the start of the show. We'll start with we flip the coin. There's no rule about this, but we'll start the introductory presentations with a rule of seniority. So we pass the word to begin with our veteran scholar here, Pauline Kassermans. Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you, Federico. Thank you for making me feel old as well. So my name is Pauline. I'm from the Netherlands. I was part of the first cohort, as was highlighted. So I joined the Schwarzman Scholars program in 2016. A little bit of background on what I did before joining the Schwarzman program is that I finished my undergrad in Amsterdam, doing a liberal arts degree on political science and international relations. And then I finished a master's degree in Rotterdam, focusing more on business and management. And actually what really inspired me to apply for the Schwarzman program was my own political experience, having run for office, the European Parliament in 2014, and actually really taking that experience and the insights I gathered in the European context and really spending time in China to understand the Chinese context. And that was also the inspiration for my own Capstone project. So the topic of my research was focusing on the Belt and Road Initiative, which is currently really a key term when you think about Chinese international relations. But back in 2016, it was still relatively new. So when I was writing my thesis, I even had to replace the term from what was formerly known as the One Belt, One Road Initiative to the Belt and Road Initiative. And I was really curious to understand how the Belt and Road Initiative was influencing Chinese foreign relationships, specifically with European officials, and thinking about it from a theoretical lens as well as a practical lens. So really thinking through international relations theory and analyzing whether the Belt and Road Initiative is more considered as a realist project versus a liberal project. But really testing that by talking to different European diplomats. So I took 8 different case studies from different parts of the European Union, and I did a qualitative analysis. So I interviewed those diplomats and analyzed how they were actually viewing how the EU is engaging with and responding to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And through that analysis, I found that on the one hand, it seemed that European officials were very eager to engage with China with their outwards look and really thinking through how we as a European Union entity can actually engage with the global player that China is. But if you looked at it more from a one-to-one or a country-to-country perspective, it seemed that, funnily enough, each individual European member state regarded itself as the endpoint of the Belt and Road Initiative. So really an indicator that each individual country was seeing it more as my country in relationship to China, as well as maybe my area. So thinking more about the regional collaborations, such as the 16+1. So the Southern Eastern European countries engaging with China in a separate platform, rather than really thinking about an EU comprehensive response or collaboration with the Belt and Road Initiative as such. So through my Capstone project, by interviewing these diplomats and by doing the case study and thinking through it from a lens of the international relations perspective, I was able to apply my own experience from both my undergrad and grad program, where I also wrote something similar in terms of a thesis, but then also really taking the opportunity living in Beijing and being able to go out and interview those diplomats out in Sanlitun in Beijing mainly, and also using the great academic team, both at Schwarzman as well as Tsinghua, working with Professor Amitav as well as Professor Zhang Yongbing from the School of Public Policy, actually really thinking through what it means to embark on such an academic endeavor in a Chinese context. So for on the personal reflection, it was a really interesting process, both when it came to being able to go out and speak to people who work in China on a day-to-day basis, while also being able to dive deeper into the academic context and what it takes to pursue such a research in China, so to say. So that is a very brief introduction on my Capstone research, as well as the process, and a little bit of background on me. So I'm curious to hear the questions that might come later, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Pauline. And it's a fascinating thesis. I had the pleasure to read that over the weekend, and it's really still very current in many ways. I want to pass the word to Enoch now to talk a little bit about a very, very different thesis that he wrote, and talk a little bit more about maybe what you're doing now, Enoch. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Federico. Thank you, Pauline. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Greeting from Beijing. My name is Enoch. I was born in Hong Kong, but I spent 2/3 of my life outside of the city. I was one of the Chinese scholars from the class of 2019. I've been extremely fortunate as I never paid for my master and my undergraduate degree, as I received a full scholarship to study at University of Warwick and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics, Operational Research, Statistics, and Economics, as nerdy as you can get, really, and nothing to do with global affairs or global leadership. That showed the diversity of the program. I was definitely one of the older scholars, thanks Federico for mentioning, and had 8 years of full-time work experience prior to joining Schwarzman College. Right before the program, I was running my 3rd educational startup and raised around 1 million USD. Basically, what we do is we offer a B2B product, which is an outsourcing service to educational institutions and companies. Essentially, we help schools, universities, and multinationals to design and execute customized educational program on creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship. As you can imagine, this is a relatively secretive industry, particularly to students, faculty, and university administrators. One of the main reasons is that most research and literature were done by professional service firms instead. Though it was secretive, the industry is not small at all. The global market of this kind of educational services is approximately 4 billion USD, with 80% in the US. So combining my entrepreneurial and consulting experience with my educational interests, I decided on the research problems and questions for my capstone together with my advisor. The official title of my capstone is New Insights into Contemporary Higher Education in the US, Framework of Online Program Management Providers and its Implication for China. In other words, my capstone aimed to propose a framework to objectively understand how companies like learning management services like Blackboard and Canvas, or MOOC platform like Coursera, Udacity, and edX, or big publisher like Pearson and Wiley. How do they work in the Anglosphere? And then analyze what does that mean for Chinese education as a researcher, policymakers, and university administrators. The scope of my study is mainly public higher education institutions, which enable me to focus more on the privatization of higher education. And of course, fast forward 1 year, I never imagined what has happened since my submission of my capstone. Just like Pauline's experience, things change. And initially it was a very niche area, and now it's in very, very high demand. So currently I'm working at the Ministry of Education Research Center for Online Education as a special project manager and a research assistant. I'm also writing 2 books, one with them. By using the framework I actually proposed in my capstone to analyze over 100 case studies of emergency remote learning from Chinese university during the COVID-19 period. Another book is about the landscape of this technology-enabled higher education services. If you were me, you would know online education has been in existence for a very, very long time. Otherwise, I would not be able to find and analyze over 200 legal contracts between public university in US and private firms. But which again, the entire industry is very, very big. It's valued over 4 billion US. Yet there is this general feeling that this is the same as what we did, or what a lot of universities did in just 7 days when they switched from online teaching and learning. When they switched from campus to online teaching and learning. Hopefully my second books will shed some light onto this landscape. And last, almost wrapping up, and thanks to the Schwarzman experience and the Capstone project, I was able to realize there's so much potential with digitalization and privatization in higher education for increasing quality education for all, but also many challenges as well, as we become all too familiar in the last few months. Once the virus is over, I hope to continue this as a PhD study. And last but not least, I hope to one day welcome you at this Schwarzman College, the wonderful building behind me, and this incredible country that we call China, and home for Schwarzman Scholars. Thank you so much. I welcome any questions.
Thank you so much, Enoch. I think it was the most, of all capstones, I can say that it was the luckiest one. I mean, nobody could anticipate a more relevant topic a year ago than online educational management and the need and application for this. So congratulations for the incredible capacity to foresee the future and the needs. So moving on to Jun Young, and I remind everybody who is watching us to also, if you have questions, start sending them. We'll try to wrap up and gather them together and ask them as the conversation goes. But Jun Young, thank you very much for joining us again.
Thank you, Federico. Thank you, everyone, for your presentations. I've just been enjoying listening to all of you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jun Yan. I'm from the second cohort. I grew up in Gansu. It's a remote, poor, but very scenic, beautiful province in northwest China. I did my undergrad in international relations at Tsinghua University in Beijing and master's in European studies at LSE, where I explored the ideas and identities of Europe. At Schwarzman College, I continue to take courses mainly on politics, international relations, sociology, and I'm currently working at Chatham House, a think tank based in London, and I'm going to do my PhD in political science back in Tsinghua University later this year. This is my great opportunity and great pleasure to take part in this conversation and sharing with you my experience about my capstone project. But it does feel like defending my capstone 2 years after writing it. So I've put up this slightly celebratory background of Schwarzman College on the graduation ball with all these purple balloons and lanterns celebrating. So my capstone was about the evolution and formation of a Chinese identity entitled Becoming Chinese, Recovering an Inclusive Identity. I chose this topic for a few reasons. Personally, after a year reading European identities, I reflected and became very interesting how we Chinese became Chinese, albeit all these differences we had and still have in terms of academic research. There has been a wave of reflection in humanity and social science to kind of discover and reiterate a Chinese approach to understanding questions in all these different disciplines. And in reality, with the rise of power and international exchange, China has to advance kind of its understanding of the world, but also of itself. It is important for China to keep and become more open and inclusive to avoid the trap of the narrow nationalist and the nativist view that have rapidly grown all over the world in the past few years. To be more specific, with its deeper engagement with the world, China has welcomed a rapidly increasing number of migrants and intermarriages in this century, which has led to a growing population of migrants, second generation of migrants and mixed race people who are not always smoothly accepted socially when some of them actually self-identify themselves as Chinese. So I wonder, how can one become Chinese, and how has the Chinese identity been like throughout the history? And can Chinese identity be more inclusive of people who identify themselves with the culture regardless of how they look? So this research attempted to explore whether and how non-Chinese nationals who move to China and self-identify as Chinese can become socially accepted as Chinese. And I dug into the missing lessons we forgot to draw on, mainly history, and read extensively of history and classics. Reviewing the evolution of the Chinese nation and identity, as well as how foreign commerce eventually become Chinese throughout different time periods in history, this research had some main findings on the inclusiveness and exclusivity. But I won't be expanding too much on that. But the research did argue that whether China enjoys strong power and cultural confidence determine its kind of inclusiveness or exclusiveness of newcomers. With the deepening globalization, a more inclusive Chinese identity will be possible for a rising China. But albeit all these kind of a promising possibility in theory, in reality, though, policy innovation and directives from above are called for in order to cultivate a broadly accepted inclusive Chinese identity, as well as to provide more efficient administration on and service to the increasing migration. So I've touched upon policy recommendations such as the urgent quick fix to make healthcare accessible to migrants living in China. And in the medium term, dual citizenship should be allowed with clear tax obligations. And in the long run, the inclusive identity of ethnic minorities and foreign migration should be covered and emphasized in more education curriculum. The entire process during doing this capstone gave me the chance to read extensively on subjects I wasn't familiar with. And with the help from professors from all the different disciplines and peers from diverse backgrounds, I got to provide a new angle of historic narrative and keep up with the event and stay relevant. Nothing incredible like Enoch's achievement with his capstone, but there are some current affairs happening kind of really relevant to this capstone. In March 2018, when I was wrapping up writing my capstone, Chinese Immigration Administration was established. Earlier this year, as some of you may have heard of, the regulations of PRC on the management of permanent residents of foreigners was out for reading and hearings. There have been backlash and controversies, but this long way would be worth taking for all of us who want more inclusiveness wherever we live. So thank you.
Thank you, Junyan. And it's a fascinating thesis and so well written. And I think just from the three, and I'll pass the word to Roy, but I think the attendees can get a sense of not only how different the topics are and the choice of objectives, but also the methodologies and the disciplines that are used to complement this capstone. And I think, you know, I would disagree with you, Junyan, because I think your topic is perhaps even more relevant than Enoch's, and that we can generate a controversy here in the panel. Roy.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Roy Siegel. As was mentioned, I'm from the third cohort, and it's very exciting to be here today and share with you one of my favorite parts of the Schwarzman Scholars program in general. Before Schwarzman Scholars program, I went to Columbia University. I got my bachelor's in economics and East Asian studies, specifically in Chinese linguistics, and I've been very involved in Sino-Israeli relations in many different ways. So if you're interested, reach out. I've always had a passion for transliteration. Transliteration is the movement between two languages. It's how to write the phonetics of one language using the alphabet of another language. I used to come up with transliteration systems since the age of 13 when I started studying Chinese, and then coming to Schwarzman Scholars program. When I first sat in an info session for the program, I felt like the program was opened for me. So if you're feeling the same way, apply, don't think twice. So I knew coming into the program, I liked the mission of being a bridge between China and other countries, US, Israel in my case. And since my passion for transliteration just kept evolving over the years, I thought that it would be right to use my capstone as an opportunity to actually come up with a standardized transliteration system from modern standard Mandarin Chinese into Hebrew. Why did I want to do that? So the title of my work is the Sino-Hebraic Transliteration System, the Hebraization of Mandarin Chinese. I did that because I was very annoyed. I read Israeli news all the time and I hear about China. Not all Israelis using our own Hebrew language misspell Chinese pronouns and names all over the place in the news, in books, but we also mispronounce them. And that bothered me very much. So coming into the college, I had to start and explain to the academics team what I actually want to do, that I actually have a methodology that I've come up with that can solve this problem of spelling mispronunciations. And my methodology solves it. Have three different guiding principles. And one is phonetic accuracy. We want Hebrew speakers to be able to pronounce Chinese pronouns correctly. The second one is one-to-one correspondence, which means that we can move back and forth between Chinese characters, pinyin, which is the official system of the Chinese government, and then my system in the Hebrew language. And finally, I wanted my system to resemble pinyin as much as possible. So as you can see, I focused on linguistics, transliteration, and international relations. I worked with Professor Wang Hui, who from Tsinghua University. and Schwarzman College. And then I needed to find 2 linguists to give me authority, help me make decisions that then would be used by people who use my system. So I located an Israeli Chinese language linguist from the Hebrew University. Her name is Lihi. I also worked with a Chinese Hebrew linguist from Peking University. Together, we formed a small team of 3 linguists, including myself, and we started making different transliteration decisions that obviously are outlined throughout 96 pages with our logic to the decisions that we've made. My capstone also had, my capstone also had a more academic part to it, which kind of gave an overview of the history of Chinese transliteration and then Hebrew transliteration, and then how do we combine the 2 at this point in time. So the reason I chose this background, this is the Schwarzman College Library, one of my favorite places in the building, and I used to sit right here. I don't know if you can see, but I used to sit right here, and I didn't leave my place for almost 2 months to be able to complete this on time and make sure that it's that it can be used by other people, and that I have sound logic and everything is organized. So I kind of wanted to bring you back to my space. You can ask Enoch. I was always there. So what's also really fun about the Capstone project is while I was sitting here, many of my friends were sitting in other chairs around this library, and we kind of lived through the experience of writing these capstone projects under limited time, and kind of, we lived each other's projects, which was so interesting. People are doing so many different things, as you can tell from this webinar, that you can actually learn from other people, and they can maybe learn Hebrew while I do this transliteration system. There's 2 things I want to mention before I end. So at the end of the program, there is a 7-minute symposium, which you can literally share with the community whatever you choose to share. You have 7 minutes to share a topic of your expertise. So obviously I chose this. I chose the Sino-Hebraic transliteration system and gave a lesson to the community of how to transliterate from Mandarin Chinese into Hebrew. I am currently working with the Academy of the Hebrew Language to find a way to make my system the official system for transliteration in Israel. And I'm also working towards pursuing a PhD that generalizes the methodology of transliteration so that we are not only restricted to the Hebrew language, but we can use the same linguistic or transliterary methodology to solve transliteration, misspelling, and pronunciations in other languages besides Hebrew. So this is my capstone project. It was one of the highlights of my year by far, and that's it. I welcome any questions.
It's brilliant. Thank you so much, Roy. And I think your enthusiasm shows not only the breadth of the project, but also, the many different ways, we try to tell applicants and prospective students, how do they demonstrate leadership? And I think your capstone is a perhaps unorthodox, but very, very good example of how scholars demonstrate leadership. This is a program that is open for people to, take on the action, and you had an idea, you had a very, very ambitious idea, and you managed to accomplish brilliantly. I was reading through the capstone and I was mesmerized, and it was almost at the end when I realized I don't know any Hebrew or Chinese, but it was still fascinating. So that's great. I'll pass now to a facilitated conversation. I think Sheila and I have a few questions to each of a few pre-prepared questions to each of the panelists today. I know that there are quite a few questions coming up in our Q&A box, and many of them are great questions, and we'll address them as the conversation goes. So I would like to start with Pauline and go back from transliteration back to EU and China politics. And I think, it's a fascinating capstone thesis in that you basically talk about, use the BRI or Belt and Road Initiative, which now has different names, to basically discuss 2 very classic perspectives and approaches in international relations, right? The kind of dichotomy between liberalism and realism. And it has been 3 years since you conducted your research, and a lot has changed in global politics, especially in regards to China and world politics, trade wars, rising international tensions, nationalistic appeals, especially in the West. And I just, I think a lot of not me, but I think a lot of the conversations and the mainstream conversations in IR, the enthusiasm with globalization has give way to a more realistic perception of world relations. So do you think your findings, the findings that you had in your thesis, do you think they would be different today if you would be able to conduct the same research 3 years after the college?
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Federico. And I think indeed where I started was also that the Belt and Road at the time was a very new initiative. So I think what I am following currently, I'm working in strategy execution consulting. So I'm not anymore super active in the academic realm of EU-China relations. But what I follow by following the news and kind of following the network that I built while being in Beijing, my impression is that directionally the conclusions will probably be quite similar in terms of this idea that indeed we're moving towards more of a kind of new realism when it comes to national interest, when it comes to also in current circumstances, how people are engaging with other countries and how they provide aid and how countries are collaborating. My impression is that the outcomes will most likely be quite similar. I think what would be very different today is that the initiative has progressed a lot. So while I was conducting my interviews, the Belt and Road Forum was organized. So that was already a big event. But I think it became much, much clearer in terms of what China's plans are, how they're engaging with other governments, what types of projects they're investing in versus when I started conducting the research early 2017 when things were still very much in the early stages and everyone was still kind of knowing it was this big project, but still unsure what the exact details of the execution are. And I think that has become at least a little bit more clear today. So I think the depth of the interviews will probably be based more on the concrete examples rather than impressions and the strategy documents, so to say.
Great. One more question and then I'll pass to Sheila. I mean, there's so many questions that come up. It's almost unfair to try and summarize all of them in this short conversation. But do you think the EU now has come to a more, we've seen since you graduated 3 years ago or almost 3 years ago, Italy was the first NATO member to join, first NATO G7 and EU member to join the Belt and Road Initiative officially. And a lot of other developments that have happened since you graduated. Do you think the European Union today, or what's your feeling? You've been involved in European Union politics and all that. Do you think there's a more cohesive strategy to deal with China, or still, China's ambitions and the Belt and Road Initiative and specifically still generate divisions within European members? Well, what is your feeling?
Yeah, so my feeling here would be that there's a lot of questions that you can raise around the European collaboration before thinking about how the EU engages with other countries, including China. So I think what happened since I ran for office in 2014 and also since I graduated from the Schwarzman program is actually that the EU is faced with a lot more internal challenges as well on how we collaborate, how we actually kind of show up as one entity on the global stage. And that then the outcome is that I would be very surprised if I were to have the interviews again, that people would not regard their own country as the ultimate end station of the Belt and Road Initiative. So I think since then, maybe the policies haven't necessarily changed and become more comprehensive. What I do think did change, if I look at least at the Dutch perspective, is that people have become much more aware of the fact that China is really a big player and that we should think more about how are we engaging with the country. So the political party I'm a member of, and I know other parties in the Netherlands have started to shape their ideas and thinking and are aware that they should consider it more actively rather than think about it more reactively, so to say. So that would be it.
Oh, perfect. Pauline.
Thank you, Pauline. And I wanted to ask Roy a few questions about your project. I think one of the most interesting things that you outlined in your capstone was really tangible steps for how you envisioned your research being applied. So it wasn't just being created in a vacuum, but you were presenting ideas on how specifically it could be used in the real world, which is amazing. And you spoke a little bit about it being utilized by the Academy of the Hebrew Language. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about what steps you took to really make that happen. And then sort of a related question, given your background in Chinese language, I was curious what led you to this program specifically? What inspired you to feel like you fit as a Schwarzman Scholar as opposed to pursuing more of a language-oriented program?
Sure. So I'll start with the first question of the Academy of the Hebrew Language. When I was writing the capstone, I had in mind, so mine is not the first transliteration system to Hebrew. What differentiates it from other transliteration systems is that the other ones are random. Someone sat in a room and decided that this letter is that letter and that letter is this letter, and that's it, with no reasonings and no explanations. So I came up with 3 guiding principles that lock your decisions. So if you follow the logic and you agree with the logic, you just cannot make other decisions or other transliteration other transliteration forms. That's how I call it in my capstone. So when you doing it in a standardized way allows me to come to the Academy of Hebrew Language and say that I have a better solution than what's out there in the marketplace for transliteration systems. So when I approached the Hebrew Academy of Language, and we're in discussions now, that it's a governmental agency, I need to go through approvals and steps. I used my personal network, because Israel is a small country, to get to the Academy of the Hebrew Language. And that's the first step of the real world applications of my capstone to fix, as I mentioned, misspellings and mispronunciations in news, in language pedagogy, etc. And then I actually want to take the underlying methodology, the linguistic methodology, and apply it to other languages, but that's the next step. In terms of the program, as I mentioned in my 5-minute presentation, when I sat in an info session for Schwarzman Scholars program, I literally thought it was made for me. And it's a very rare feeling. It doesn't really happen very often in life. I was looking to pursue a master's after my bachelor's degree anyways, and I was curious to go. I had lived in China twice before, in high school and in college, for studying Chinese. And I really wanted to go back to China. I hadn't had enough, still not, but now I can't fly. But I hadn't had enough. It was just for me that I want to return to China and keep studying. And it was a feeling that I just couldn't resist. So once I learned about the program, I was looking for alternatives because I knew that the chances of getting in are not very high and I needed backup plans, but I decided to go all the way and apply for the program, was lucky enough to get in, and yeah.
Hey, so move on. It's a very fast-paced webinar. This is all fascinating. I wanted to talk to you for like 5 hours each. I'll ask a question to Enoch, and you know, I'm personally very interested too in the topic of that you studied in international higher education, especially online higher education, which is obviously a super relevant topic now. And just wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on, because mainly you basically talk about 2 very different realities, and the realities of higher education are online programming in the United States, which is a mature higher education system, and China, which is a evolving and developing and fastly growing higher education system. And I just wanted to ask you to talk about the reality of, you know, not only China is a paradigmatic example, but their higher education has been changing significantly in many other developing nations, right? The demand for higher education, the number of enrollment. So the question is, how do you think that this new online program management policies and technologies can help other developing nations and other realities? If you think that your work could be applied to other realities beyond the study you make of US and China.
Cool. Thank you for the question. So I'll address the question that was asked by Federico. So I think online education, I think for online education, the most important thing is not actually online, it's education. Whereas in the previous decade, there's a lot of focus on online, the technology part. That's why there's MOOC platform like Coursera and edX, etc. But then there's not so much focus on education. There's plenty of studies to talk about access and equality. So many studies have shown that online education, particularly in the MOOC form, the massive open online courses form, that the people who benefit the most are those who have degrees, those who have possibly a higher sort of a median income bracket of the world and of the city. Probably most of us who are listening to this now, but not necessarily what you mentioned in the developing country. So I think the biggest contributing factor to them not being able to benefit as much is that at the end of the day, it is about learning how to learn. And those people who do not have a degree don't really, they're not equipped to learn, and they don't understand things such as discipline, such as Roy, right? No one without a university degree, Roy would not be able to sit in a library for 2 months straight, right? He would not be able to understand what it takes to actually produce a high quality thesis. So therefore, this is one of the biggest barrier, particularly for developing economy. And the other thing is, as I spoke about in my thesis, one of the most important, I would imagine, contribution is that besides online and education, there's a part of management. So what I found is that when privatization or when private firms come into that sphere, they were able to manage learners. So increasingly in different universities, not at the lead one, but at different universities, there's a new department called Student Success Team. So they're basically a team of mainly administrators, admin people, people who don't necessarily qualify as a faculty or professor, but they're people who are really good at details, are really good at following up. They're people who track down students as things that I would imagine most of us hate to do, just track down students on deadlines, right? And things like, have you done different assignment? Like basically a teaching assistant, so to speak. So that's why what I recommended and what I imply is that this idea of management firms, not tech firms and not courseware driven companies, these are the firms which are able to create a big difference, particularly at area that they might not have a degree, an area lower income, an area that they might not have as much access because they don't quite know the journey. So I think that would change a lot, particularly in the near future, and also as we spring towards a lot of new online degrees, etc., that's coming up. So if I may, I just want to add, I saw some of the question which I think I might be able to shed some lights on, particularly on choosing the topics. I think one thing that really helped me to go through, and particularly what I answered just now, was choosing an advisor. I particularly wanted, I never considered the topic of my capstone. I wish I had actually, given in hindsight, because I think it really helped to focus your whole entire experience. And I think choosing a good advisor is very, very important. For example, I wanted to investigate in the Anglosphere, so I chose an advisor who was a 10-year professor previously in Melbourne, so he was able to help me from Australia, from the UK, etc. perspective. I wanted an advisor that I want to develop a relationship with. So we end up spending, maybe 1 to 2 hours every week on just exchanging ideas. He brought me to an international conference in the US for 10 days, and we are co-authoring papers and books. So it really depends what kind of experience you want. And the most important of all is that I think the Schwarzman Scholars program are able to give you that access. I think it's just that it's that platform that we have. We have local faculty members and international faculty members. There's people who ask in the Q&A talking about different specific topics. I almost can guarantee you there will be someone who knows something, or someone who knows someone else who will be able to advise you. And I think that with this kind of caliber of program, in investment of this kind of Schwarzman Scholar program, are able to, I think, fulfill most of what you want to do. And if not, I believe if you do get in, you'll be innovative enough, you'll be entrepreneurial enough to find your way through, whether it's through peers, as Roy mentioned, or just through this great platform. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Enoch. And last but not least, I wanted to direct a question towards Junyan to talk a little bit about your research. So I was curious if you could expand a little bit upon what inspired your interest in identity and nation building, and what your research process looked like in addressing these topics.
Sure, thanks, Sheila. So as I've just mentioned earlier, I did European Identities for my first master's. At that time, we were reading about like securitization of so like Roma or Muslims in Europe, about the shared history of historical events and memories and belief in certain values that bond Europe together and kind of moving beyond national borders. Those topics made me kind of reflect on the history and current affairs of my own country. Some are kind of very similar, some are different. And I personally was particularly interested in how we became recognizing each other as us, despite that people in my hometown might be very familiar with minarets and mosques in the city, but other Chinese from other parts of the country might just feel like, oh, those are so exotic and beautiful and scenic, but for like sightseeing. But at that time, I didn't really have the chance to work on that because I was kind of inspired by diving into European history, Copenhagen School, and identity politics, all of that. But then moving into or like joining Schwarzman College, I found it a perfect place to explore something new, something that I hadn't done before. The college and professors were just so encouraging and supportive of us trying out new topics and directions. I remember when I was choosing between several topics of Capstone, I think someone mentioned in the Q&A box about like when did we choose the topics. That was module 2 when we were deciding, and I just saw an article published in Wall Street Journal on Chinese identity by a professor who at the moment was teaching a course at the college. So because Chinese identity is kind of one thing I'm interested in exploring, but I haven't done, and then I just had a conversation with him, talked to him in the dining hall actually over lunch, if I could just ask him if I could work on this topic with his supervision, and he kindly agreed, even if I was not even enrolled in his class. Then I asked him about like the 3 approaches in my mind to proceeding in this topic, including the focusing on Chinese diasporas, or focusing on history and ideas, or focusing on the language and the education. And he helped me narrow it down to history and ideas, particularly like the political participation and recognition, and recommended me quite a few classics by sinologists from around the world, and also the older classics, even the original text from like speech or conversations by an emperor between the Ming emperor with like an Italian missionary who was working in China at that time. That also is answering the question about the methodology was heavily history-based, heavily text-based. And during this process, I was very also actively talking to other professors apart from my own advisor about the subjects, and gladly I just found many of the ideas came together in the end. There was a moment when I was stuck in the identity politics and feeling identity politics might not be the narrative I was looking for to explain what happened in Chinese history, ancient and contemporary. So another professor who taught comparative politics in political science encouraged me to think from the other side of the coin of the identity politics, which is nation building. So I then read about nation building and found this approach appealing to me. And moreover, I found lots of new questions worth exploring regarding like nation building and its theories, and decided to do a PhD on it. So I would say the experience at the college helped me with my capstone, but more importantly, helped me kind of discover and define my career path with professors from all these different disciplines, and also some classmates from other backgrounds, and also the access to kind of competing perspectives to the same issue in the world.
Thank you so much, Junyan. We're getting close to our final hour here, so I want to be respectful to everybody's time, and there's a lot of very good questions in the Q&A box. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to answer all of them, but I left there a few indications, the schedule of future webinars, and also our contact information through admissions, and I'll be glad to pass on any specific question that is targeted to one of the panelists that was not addressed during the session. I'll be happy to forward it to them. But I just wanted to run through a few questions and ask for the comments of all the panelists there. One question is about how specific you have to be in your application about what you want to study and what you want to research. And from an admissions point of view, you know, this is not the master's degree at Schwarzman College. We're inviting people from very different backgrounds, very different disciplines, people who have work experience or people who are coming straight out of college. And we do not demand any formal project, such as, you know, conventional master's degree in Europe, or it is more common in Latin America, where you have to propose something with a hypothesis and variables and all that. But if any of you could pick up and very quickly comment on what you had to do beforehand in your application, and if you had to decide about what you wanted to research during your before that. Any of you jump in and quickly.
I knew what I wanted to research coming into the program, but I actually did not include it in my application whatsoever. I only started sharing my topic once I got to the college. So I don't think it's mandatory to know exactly what you want to do. You can also explore while at the college in Beijing.
Thanks, Roy. I wanted to jump to the next question that asks about the process of proposing your topic of choice. What was the process of being matched with your advisor? How much time was allotted to this, and talking through sort of your time management process as you were working on your capstone. So if any of you would like to expand on that.
I think Roy is not a good example because he was the whole time in the library. He will scare people away.
I'm happy to jump in. I was also one of these people that had a general interest coming into the program, but I didn't specifically know what I wanted to do in my capstone. So I took the first couple of months to figure out, to attend courses. And I think, Sheila, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're able to build on the research that you're doing in one of the courses and actually leverage that experience for the capstone itself. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to not start from scratch, but to actually leverage what you've been doing before. And I think, as all panelists already highlighted, it's just this vibrant, I mean, you can see the building, and I'm hoping we have the opportunity again to go there again soon. But the fact that you're living in this building with 100+ people, and the faculty is often either living there or is there a lot of the time. So there's so much opportunity for you to constantly talk to people, learn from their experience, and in that way maybe more subconsciously develop your ideas and interests, and from that define it with your supervisor. I don't remember the exact timelines, but I think it's slightly before Chinese New Year, like midway through the program or so, that you're submitting your capstone topic. And I think, having done more qualitative research, for me it was a combination of writing the theoretical framework but then actually going out. So I think overall it was maybe 2 to 3 months of work, kind of building the theoretical framework, reaching out to diplomats over social media or kind of via to get those connections, and then execute it in combination. I had the benefit actually that I was doing a PTP, like a project, like a mini internship at the Gates Foundation that was also based in Sanlitun. So I could often combine my trips to the other side of Beijing with that activity as well as with the interviews. So combining that was relatively easy. And I think overall, I mean, you're dedicated, but having attended a master's degree in Europe, I think it's very comparable to a thesis process that you would see in a typical kind of master's degree, so to say.
I just want to add one small thing. I think it's good to note that I think at least 3 out of 4 of us who are going to do a PhD or planning to do a PhD, this does not represent at all the cohort. At least in my cohort, I don't know in the first and second, I don't think it does. So I hope this panel does not scare you of thinking that Capstone is everything that we do. Though I think it really depends on because of the diversity that we have here. And I think everything that we do is opportunity cost. And I personally believe for those who succeed in the application, have great management of time and understand the priority and what to prioritize and what not. And I think I would argue that's the most important skills that you need to have before coming in, because there's just so much and so many different opportunities throughout this just 1 year. I think if you can easily stress out to a 3-4 years degree, the amounts of opportunities that you need, the amount of lectures and conversations that you have, etc. So I think to go back to one of the questions that was asked, I think it's important to be intentional, but also having an open mind. I think that's very, very important. You don't have to be fixed, but I think you have to be intentional when you apply and when what you put down. Be specific, but also be open-minded. That's what I want to add.
Yeah, if I could just add in 1 minute, take everyone's time. Just about like Capstone comparing to other theses, as I did master's thesis, Tsinghua undergrad thesis, and I'm going to do a PhD. Capstone is very kind of practice oriented. It is about the real world issues, real world problems, and offering solutions to that. And even if many of us here may have done like research paper, more theoretical work, but most works were actually much more on the practice policy recommendations or the practice of business. In my cohort, there was a classmate who did his capstone basically on the investment in Malta, and he actually presented that to the Maltese government, and also that was actually directly related to his own business and work. So you would need to take this capstone as the opportunity to kind of to develop your own network, to facilitate your own career development, rather than just to finish this capstone writing. And this whole process will actually help you kind of lay one or more bricks of the path of your career. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think, obviously there's so many more questions, and I think if anything, this webinar gives I think it fulfilled its promise, and we could have many more of those. But I just wanted to be cognizant of everybody's time and thank each and every one of you who attended the webinar, but especially to you, alumni. You're incredible, and this I learned a lot. So thank you so much, everybody. All right. So with that, I'll say bye. If you have any other questions that were not answered, please write to the admissions team and we'll address your question the best possible way. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.